Imagine for a second that you're being dragged out of a burning building. You're coughing, you're covered in soot, total disoriented, but you are alive, right?
Right. You made it out.
Exactly. Your rescuer pulls you onto the sidewalk, looks you dead in the eye, and immediately just drops this 500-page, single-spaced manual on fire safety regulations right into your lap.
Oh, man.
And they demand you memorize it. Right then and there.
Huh.
I mean, if that happened to you, you would probably sit there on the curb thinking, wait a second, are you trying to save me or are you just trying to completely control me?
Yeah, I think that reaction is incredibly common, actually, because, we are just culturally conditioned to view any kind of imposed rule as an immediate threat to our personal autonomy.
Oh, absolutely. Like you hear the word law and your brain probably does this involuntary flinch. For you listening right now, maybe it brings up the feeling of, I don't know, a traffic ticket tucked under your windshield wiper.
Ugh, the worst.
Or the anxiety of sweating through tax forms. Or even just clicking agree on an endless terms of service document so you can finally use your phone.
Mhm.
We associate laws with the fine print.
Yes.
They just feel like a trap, like this massive list of all the things you are absolutely not allowed to do.
Which is exactly what makes the primary source material we are examining today so jarring. I mean, it really challenges that default mindset.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today we are diving into a comprehensive document titled The Gift of the Law. It's by Chris R. Velasquez, and we're pairing it with 3 highly detailed infographics that visually map out what the author calls the biblical grand narrative.
Right, and the core argument across all these materials fundamentally dismantles our modern cynical view of the rules.
Dismantles it how?
Well, Velasquez argues that within its original context, the biblical law is not a joyless checklist at all, or tool for oppression, It is actually presented as a profound gift, a direct revelation of divine character, and really the ultimate architectural blueprint for human flourishing.
A blueprint for flourishing. I mean, that is a massive paradigm shift. But to understand how anyone could possibly view a rigid set of ancient rules as a gift, we have to rewind the tape a bit.
We do. We can't just look at the rules themselves in a vacuum.
Right. We have to examine the timing. The text makes a major point about the specific sequence of events when these laws were given, suggesting that, well, if you get the timing wrong, you basically misunderstand the entire religion.
The timing changes the entire meaning of the event, and the infographics map this out meticulously, especially in this section covering Mount Sinai, which corresponds to Exodus chapters 19 through 24.
Okay, what's the visual there?
The material highlights this strict, non-negotiable order of operations, which is that redemption precedes command.
So the rescue happens first, always.
Always. According to the narrative, God rescued the Israelites from centuries of slavery in Egypt well before he handed down the 10 Commandments.
It wasn't simultaneous.
Not at all. The preface to those commandments in Exodus 20, verse 2, anchors this perfectly. It reads, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
So the very first thing stated is the rescue itself.
Exactly. Only after that historical fact is established does the first command actually follow.
I mean, that completely flips the standard script of how we just assume religion works, right?
Completely.
The common assumption is that a deity stands at the border of a crisis, in this case, Egypt, and basically says, prove your moral worth.
Yeah.
Obey these 10 rules perfectly, and if you score high enough on the test, then I will send the plagues and part the sea to rescue you.
Yeah, that transactional framework is definitely the default human religious impulse. But the text argues it is entirely absent from the biblical narrative at Sinai. God is essentially declaring, the chains are already off. The rescue is finished. Now, because you are free, here's how you live in that freedom. Velasquez actually draws a really sharp line here between 2 entirely different operating systems for life. He calls them legalism and covenant obedience.
Okay, let's define that jargon really quick, because covenant is a heavy theological word that gets thrown around a lot without much explanation. What are we actually talking about when the source uses that term?
Well, in the ancient Near Eastern world, a covenant wasn't just a basic contract where 2 equal parties swapped goods and services. It was much closer to a treaty.
Like a political treaty.
Yeah, specifically a suzerain vassal treaty, where a powerful king who had just protected or rescued a weaker nation would establish the terms of their new relationship.
I see.
But the biblical text takes that political framework and adopts it into familial terms. Now, legalism, on the other hand, operates on the idea that you use the law as a tool to earn your status.
Which is the transactional part.
Right. And the text argues that legalism always breeds one of two things: either intense arrogance, if you think you are following the rules perfectly, or absolute crushing despair if you know you are failing.
Because your entire identity is riding on your performance.
Exactly.
But covenant obedience is the total reverse of that. You are obeying the parameters of the relationship because your status has already been secured by the rescue. The driving engine isn't fear of failing a test, The driving engine is gratitude.
And that gratitude fundamentally alters how the rules are received by the people.
I hear the logic there, I really do. But I still want to push back on behalf of the listener for a second.
Go for it.
Because even if the rescue has already happened, and even if your status is secure, a massive list of restrictions is still going to feel incredibly heavy. Let's go back to the burning building scenario. If someone saves my life, I am overwhelmingly grateful, obviously. But if they immediately hand me a binder full of mandatory lifestyle restrictions, my gratitude is going to be pretty quickly eclipsed by the feeling that I've just traded a fiery prison for, well, a bureaucratic one.
That's a fair point.
So how does the source material reconcile the sheer volume of rules with the concept of actual freedom?
The author reconciles it by pointing out the specific nature of the rules. They aren't arbitrary bureaucratic red tape. They are protective parameters.
Protective in what sense?
Think about it in terms of adopting a rescue animal. Say you go to a shelter and bring home a dog that has spent its entire life chained up, neglected, just terribly abused.
Okay.
The rescue is complete the moment you sign the papers. The dog is officially safe. But you don't express your unconditional love for that animal by, opening your front door and letting it run wildly into a busy 4-lane highway.
Right, you build a fence.
You build a fence. You put a leash on the dog. You spend months training it to sit and stay. You don't impose those boundaries so that you will finally love the dog. You impose the boundaries because you already love the dog, and you want to keep it alive.
Wow, so the rules are actually the proof of the rescue.
Exactly. They are the evidence of the care.
That reframes things significantly. Because if the Israelites had just been dropped into the desert without any structure at all, they would have just recreated the exact same society they just left Egypt.
Yes, they would have defaulted to what they knew.
They would have run right back into traffic, morally speaking. And the infographic actually has a great phrase for this under the Sinai section. It says, not escape only, but formation.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah, the deliverance at the Red Sea had to become discipleship at Sinai. Otherwise, the freedom would have just destroyed them.
The text insists that true freedom isn't the absence of boundaries. It is the presence of the right boundaries. But this does raise a chronological issue that the author addresses head-on.
Okay, what's the issue?
Well, if this life-saving fence was given at Mount Sinai, what was happening for the thousands of years of human history prior to that moment?
Oh, right.
Did the universe just operate without any moral boundaries until Moses climbed the mountain?
That is a glaring question. If the rules are so essential to human survival, it seems like a massive oversight to just leave humanity in the dark for generations.
It does look that way at first glance.
But the source material makes a fascinating distinction here, doesn't it? It says Sinai was not the invention of the moral law. It was simply the moment it was formally codified.
Yes, Velazquez explicitly states that God didn't suddenly become moral at Sinai. The argument is that the law actually has a creational structure.
Creational meaning it's tied to the beginning of the world.
Right. The moral order of the universe is just as deeply woven into reality as the physical laws of nature. The author points back to Genesis 1, where humanity is made in the image of God. In this theological framework, being made in the divine image means that human life is intrinsically designed to reflect divine character, things like knowledge, righteousness, and holiness.
So the law is essentially the universe's DNA.
It is the moral grammar of creation. That's how he puts it. And the texts provide concrete examples showing that this grammar was actively operating long before Sinai.
Like what?
Well, in Genesis 2, Adam is given specific commands regarding boundaries in the garden. In Genesis 4, God warns Cain that sin is crouching at his door.
Which implies a clear moral standard was already in place.
Exactly. You can't have sin without a standard to break. And then during the narrative of Noah in Genesis 6 through 9, the world is judged specifically for violence and the shedding of blood.
Okay, I see the pattern.
So Sinai doesn't introduce some alien concept. It just takes creation's moral grammar and brings it into clearer speech.
But wait, if it is already the fundamental grammar of reality, why did it need to be spelled out on giant stone tablets? I mean, if it is baked into our design, shouldn't it just be obvious? Why the redundancy?
The author attributes that necessity to the fall. Human sin is fundamentally a rebellion against our own created limits. We suffer from a kind of willful moral amnesia.
Moral amnesia. I like that phrase.
The text emphasizes that the law reveals not only human dignity, but human limits. We are finite, dependent, embodied creatures. We are not self-defining deities.
Right.
Human flourishing relies on aligning with the creational structure principles like truth-telling, stewardship, marriage, and Sabbath rest. When we rebel against our limits, we distort our own reality.
You know, for you listening, consider the physical law of gravity. You don't need a written decree passed by some legislature to tell you that gravity exists.
No, you don't.
You are bound by it whether you acknowledge it or not. But if a whole society of people suddenly starts enthusiastically jumping off high cliffs because they decide they want to be, quote unquote, free from the restriction of falling.
Which would be disastrous.
Totally disastrous. Well, you are going to need to erect a massive, highly visible warning sign at the edge of that cliff.
And the warning sign doesn't invent the concept of gravity.
No, not at all. It just points out reality that the society is disastrously ignoring. The sign is there to preserve life from the distortion of delusion. The stone tablets at Sinai basically act as the ultimate warning sign for a humanity that was literally throwing itself off the moral cliff.
That preservation of reality is the core function of the law in this phase of the narrative. The text notes that this is exactly why the law can feel so offensive to our modern sensibilities.
Because it tells us we're wrong.
Right. It wounds our pride by naming our disorder. But the author argues that the offense is medicinal. It is designed to heal the soul by forcing it back into alignment with reality.
And the specifics of that alignment are laid out in what the text calls the architectural blueprint for covenant life, the Ten Commandments. We've talked about the concept of the rules, but let's actually look at the structure of the blueprint itself.
Sure. So the Ten Commandments are divided into two distinct tables. The first table governs life before God.
Which includes what?
Having no other gods, making no idols, reverencing the name of the Lord, and keeping the Sabbath holy.
Okay, and the second table?
The second table governs life before neighbors. That's honoring parents, the sanctity of life, marital fidelity, protecting property, truthfulness, and rejecting covetousness.
The order there seems incredibly deliberate. I mean, God first, then neighbor.
The author argues that the order is the entire point. The law is fundamentally theological before it is ethical.
Meaning it's about God before it's about us.
Yes. It exists to tell us who God is, that he is holy, just, faithful, and opposed to deception. Because of that, the first commandment anchors the entire structure. The text makes a profound claim here, which is that all moral failure begins with a false god.
Let's sit with that for a second. All moral failure begins with a false god.
Yeah.
That means the rules aren't just isolated behavioral demands, right? They're a psychological cascade.
Exactly. Every broken relationship downstream is connected to a worship disorder upstream. Think about it. If your worship is disordered, if you place something other than the divine at the absolute center of your reality, whether that is money or power or even your own autonomy, your treatment of your neighbor is inevitably going to become distorted to serve that new center.
Because you will exploit people to get what you worship.
Precisely. The blueprint begins with God because that is where reality begins.
And this blueprint extends far beyond just those 10 initial rules, too. The infographics map out how the rest of the Torah builds on this foundation.
Right, you get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, you have Leviticus bringing the law into the realm of worship and purity, operating on the principle of be holy for I am holy. And then Deuteronomy comes along and places this massive emphasis on the internal state, summarizing the entire law as loving God with all your heart, soul, and might.
It demands complete internal devotion, not just checking the external boxes.
What's fascinating here is how the ancient audience responded to this demand. If you look at the Psalms, the faithful Israelite did not view this massive structure of rules as a cage.
No, they loved it.
They really did. Psalm 1 describes the blessed person as meditating on the law day and night. Psalm 19 calls it more to be desired than gold. Psalm 119 calls it a lamp to the feet. They viewed the blueprint with absolute delight. They saw it as wisdom, guidance, and really the source of immense joy.
Contrast that with modern society. I mean, we are obsessed with autonomy. The source text points out our modern desire for self-invention without accountability.
We desperately want to be the architects of our own reality.
But trying to build a society without any objective moral blueprint is like trying to build a 100-story skyscraper without an engineer's schematic.
Oh, the initial construction might feel incredibly liberating.
Oh yeah, you just stack steel beams wherever you feel like it.
You celebrate your total freedom to build however you want, and it genuinely feels like ultimate freedom right up until the first major windstorm hits.
And
Then the entire structure collapses under its own weight because it was never aligned with the fundamental laws of physics. The engineer's blueprint isn't there to restrict the builder's creativity. It is there to ensure the building doesn't crush the people living inside it.
that's a great way to put it.
The law keeps human society from collapsing under the weight of its own selfish autonomy.
However, the source material introduces a massive narrative tension at this point.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Even with a perfect blueprint, the building still collapses. The rules are flawless, but the builders are fundamentally flawed.
This is where the biblical narrative takes a devastatingly honest turn. The text points out that the law has a severe limitation. It diagnoses the disease of sin, but it possesses absolutely no power to cure it.
The Apostle Paul writes about this extensively in Romans 3 and Romans 7. He says that through the law comes the knowledge of sin. The commandment itself is good and holy, but the text argues that human rebellion actually seizes the opportunity through the commandment to produce even more sin.
It's like telling someone not to push a red button.
Exactly. The rules don't make people better, they just highlight how broken the people are.
And we see that historically almost immediately in the text. I mean, the ink isn't even dry on the stone tablets before the entire system breaks down completely.
The incident of the golden calf in Exodus 32 through 34 is the primary example of this.
It's tragic, really.
It is. While Moses is literally up on the mountain receiving the blueprint of covenant life, the people at the bottom of the mountain are actively violating the very first rule.
They are pouring their gold to build a false god.
Right. It is a catastrophic betrayal right at the inception of the relationship. And as the grand narrative progresses, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Amos, they continually expose this ongoing rebellion.
They show that it wasn't just a one-time mistake.
Exactly. They make it clear that the core problem was never a lack of information. Ignorance was not the issue. The problem was a dead heart.
So the law is perfect, but the people receiving it are incapable of keeping it. If the law just exposes our flaws and condemns our inability to meet the standard, isn't that just a recipe for crippling anxiety? I mean, why would a loving God give a gift that serves only to tell humanity they are constantly failing?
The author uses a really powerful diagnostic metaphor to explain this tension. He calls it the clean mirror.
The clean mirror.
Yeah, if you look at a perfectly clean mirror, it shows you all the dirt on your face.
Yeah.
But you can't use the mirror itself to wash the dirt off.
That makes sense. Or think about it medically. Imagine going to a specialist because you have been suffering from debilitating headaches. The doctor puts you into an MRI machine. The scan works perfectly, right? It takes high-resolution images of your brain and accurately diagnoses a life-threatening tumor.
Now, getting that scan result is objectively terrifying. It is the worst news you could possibly receive.
It is deeply distressing. And the MRI machine itself does not cure the tumor. It has no surgical capability whatsoever. But the MRI is still a profound gift, because without that terrifyingly accurate diagnosis, you will never seek out the surgeon who can actually cut the tumor out.
You can't reach the cure without passing through the clarity of the diagnosis.
Exactly. The law functions as the moral MRI. It reveals the fatal condition of the human heart.
And because that diagnosis is so severe, humanity needs a way to survive the waiting room before the surgeon arrives, so to speak.
That's a good way to phrase it.
The text explains that this is where the ceremonial laws come in. The sacrifices, the priesthood, the cleansing rituals. To a modern reader, all the animal sacrifices in Leviticus just seem bizarre, maybe even barbaric.
Very archaic, yeah.
But the author frames them as a profound mercy. Because God is completely holy and humans are entirely corrupted by this tumor of sin, they cannot interact casually without humanity being destroyed by that holiness.
Right, the incompatibility is dangerous.
So the ceremonial system provided a temporary method of mediation. It made communion possible without immediate destruction.
It managed the symptoms, but it couldn't remove the tumor.
Exactly.
And that desperate need for a permanent cure, a way to actually fix what the MRI revealed, brings the grand narrative to its ultimate turning point, the arrival of the Messiah.
The perfect blueprint requires a flawless builder. The MRI requires a master surgeon. Enter Jesus.
Yes. The text highlights that Jesus does something entirely unexpected with the law. In Matthew 5:17, he states, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them."
And that word is key.
Let's unpack the word fulfill then. What does Velazquez argue that actually means in this context? Because it clearly doesn't mean Jesus just checked off a list of behavioral requirements and then threw the rule book in the trash.
No. The text defines fulfillment as completion or embodiment. It means bringing the law to its intended ultimate goal. Jesus does not discard the law. He reveals its deepest, truest meaning.
Can you give an example?
The primary example of this is the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus actually intensifies the demands of the law. He moves a standard from external behavior management to the inward disposition of the heart.
Right, so he takes the rule, do not murder, and expands it to say that harboring bitter anger against your brother makes you subject to judgment.
Yeah.
He takes do not commit adultery and expands it to say that looking at someone with lust is already committing adultery in the heart.
And the author is careful to point out that this is not moral inflation. Jesus isn't just making the rules arbitrarily harder to ensure everyone fails. The text calls it moral unveiling.
Unveiling. I like that.
The law was always meant to address the posture of the heart. The external rules were always pointing toward internal holiness. Jesus just removes the veil and makes that undeniable.
But the narrative claims he doesn't just teach this intensified standard, right? He actually accomplishes it.
The theological core of the material states that Jesus becomes the perfect mediator. He serves as the final Passover lamb, fulfilling the entire purpose of those ceremonial and sacrificial laws we talked about.
The waiting room is over.
Exactly. According to Galatians 3:13, he actually bears the curse of the broken law on behalf of his people. He is presented as the one in whom righteousness is finally accomplished, not merely commanded. And by doing this, he activates the great promise made by the ancient prophets.
A new covenant.
Yes. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel foretold a day when the law would no longer be written on stone tablets outside of us, acting as a condemning mirror. It would be written on the human heart. The promise was that God would give his Spirit to actually provide the internal power to obey the blueprint.
I am struggling to picture how this actually works in practice, though. I mean, the Apostle Paul calls the law a tutor that leads us to Christ, and James calls it the law of liberty. But if Jesus paid the penalty, fulfilled the law perfectly, and bore the curse...
Where are you going with this?
Doesn't that mean we just get a free pass? Are believers totally off the hook? Can they just say, well, Jesus paid the bill so I can live however I want? So what does this all mean?
That question is the central tension of New Testament ethics. The Apostle Paul fought constantly against that exact assumption. The text's answer is an emphatic no. Believers are no longer under the law as a covenant of condemnation.
Okay.
Romans 6:14 declares that they are under grace. But being under grace does not equate to lawlessness. The moral will of God remains the standard, but it is now fulfilled in those who walk by the power of the Spirit. The argument is that Christ doesn't free people from the law so they can sin. He frees them so they can finally obey.
I think about it like the mechanics of learning a foreign language.
Okay, how so?
If you decide to learn French, at the very beginning, you are absolutely bound by strict, rigid grammar rules. You are constantly memorizing verb conjugations, flipping through your textbook, terrified of using the wrong tense.
Exhausting.
It is. The rules feel external, restrictive, and draining.
Yep.
We're living under the heavy burden of the quote-unquote law of French grammar. It requires constant, conscious effort.
But eventually you get better.
Right. If you persist and you immerse yourself in the culture, eventually a threshold is crossed. You become fluent. And once you are truly fluent, you no longer consciously think about the rules. You don't have to consult the textbook before you form a sentence. You just speak natively.
Ah, I see.
Now, the rules haven't disappeared. You aren't speaking chaotic gibberish. You are still perfectly following the grammar. But the rules have been internalized. They are written on your mind. You speak freely, not because you are ignoring the rules, but because the rules have become your natural way of being.
That's a beautiful analogy.
In the context of this grand narrative, Jesus doesn't abolish the grammar of holiness. He supplies the Spirit so that humanity can finally become native speakers of it.
That perfectly captures James's concept of the law of liberty. Obedience within the new covenant is not bondage. It is freedom ordered by grace. A native speaker is free precisely because they have internalized the grammar. They are empowered by it, not constrained by it.
Yes.
The text insists that the believer is not freed from holiness. The believer is freed for holiness. What God commands, he now supplies the power to execute.
But even with the beauty of this new covenant and the law of liberty, human nature is incredibly skilled at twisting good things into destructive things.
They really are.
The source text actually spends a significant amount of time outlining 5 specific traps, 5 major theological misunderstandings that people still fall into today when trying to navigate the law.
These traps are critical to examine because they are remarkably subtle and pervasive. The first trap Vlasis identifies is legalism. We touched on the psychology of this earlier. It is the attempt to use the law as a ladder for self-justification.
Right, it's trying to earn the rescue after you are already sitting safely on the sidewalk.
Precisely. It is mistaking covenant obedience for a system of merit. The author notes that legalism completely destroys the concept of grace.
Oh, so?
If you believe your obedience is earning your salvation, you are essentially telling the rescuer that you didn't actually need them. You could have walked out of the fire yourself.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this mindset inevitably breeds a toxic culture of arrogance, looking down on those who don't follow the rules as well as you do, or a culture of crushing despair, where you live in constant terror of making a mistake.
The second trap swings the pendulum to the absolute opposite extreme. It is a theological concept called antinomianism. Let's break down what that actually means in practice.
Antinomianism literally translates to anti-law. It is the total rejection of the moral law, operating under the assumption that because salvation is secured by grace, personal holiness is entirely unnecessary.
It is the mindset of the bill is paid, the grace is infinite, so I can engage in whatever behavior I want without consequence. It completely severs the rescue from the formation.
It does.
Going back to the idea of the guardrails on a treacherous mountain road, antinomianism is demanding that the state remove the guardrails in the name of driving freedom. You complain that the steel barriers are ruining your view of the valley or restricting your ability to utilize the entire width of the road, so you tear them down. And you feel incredibly liberated and free right up until you hit a patch of black ice on a hairpin turn and go over the edge.
The tragedy is that the driver only realizes too late that the restrictive guardrails were the very thing preserving their life. The author points to texts like Titus 2, which argues that the grace of God does not grant permission to sin. It actually trains believers to renounce ungodliness.
Which brings us to the third trap, and I genuinely think this is the sneakiest one for a modern listener. The text calls it moralism. Why is moralism so dangerous when it looks so good on the outside?
Moralism is behavior management without any actual heart change. It is the desire for outward compliance and societal respectability, completely devoid of the inward reality of a heart transformed by the Spirit.
Modern society absolutely rewards moralism, though. We love people who are outwardly polite, who pay their taxes, and who don't cause trouble, even if they are cold, bitter, and dead on the inside.
Yeah, we don't look past the surface.
Exactly. You can be a completely functional sociopath, but as long as you adhere to the external moral code of your community, you will be praised.
The danger is that it is the easiest fake. Moralism settles for a nice coat of paint on a rotting house. The text argues that the divine standard requires truth in the inward being. Moralism uses the law to build a respectable reputation, but it completely bypasses the need for the surgical intervention of the Messiah.
It just ignores the MRI results completely.
Exactly. It relies on human effort to clean the outside of the cup while ignoring the tumor inside.
Trap number 4 deals with how we actually read the ancient texts. The author calls it flattening the law. This happens all the time in cultural debates about the Bible.
Oh, constantly.
You see someone quote a moral law about sexuality or truth-telling, and the immediate counter-argument is, well, the Bible also says you can't eat shellfish or wear clothing woven of 2 different materials, so since you eat shrimp, you can ignore the rest of it.
That argument relies entirely on flattening the law. It fails to distinguish between the moral, ceremonial, and civil laws given to ancient Israel.
How does the text unravel that?
The text provides a framework. The moral law, summarized in the 10 Commandments, reflects the unchanging character of God and remains universally binding. The ceremonial laws, the dietary restrictions, the animal sacrifices, the specific clothing rules were designed to set Israel apart physically and manage their communion with God until the Messiah arrived.
So they had an expiration date.
Yes, because Jesus fulfilled that system. Those specific ceremonial laws are no longer binding on believers.
And what about the civil laws, the specific judicial punishments for crimes in ancient Israel?
The author notes that the civil laws must be read within their specific ancient historical setting as a theocratic nation. Modern nations are not ancient Israel. However, the underlying moral principles of justice, equity, and restitution within those civil laws still provide immense wisdom.
So you can't just lump it all together.
No, flattening all three categories into one monolithic block either forces believers to adopt obsolete ceremonial practices, or it gives them an excuse to completely discard the eternal moral standards.
And the final trap, trap number 5, seems to be the ultimate culmination of all these errors: disconnecting the law from Christ.
The text argues that any reading of the law that does not culminate in the person of Jesus is fundamentally incomplete. He is the goal of the entire grand narrative.
Right.
The author states that law without Christ only condemns, because it leaves humanity staring at the MRI scan with no hope of a cure. Conversely, Christ without the law becomes an abstract, meaningless concept, a savior who saves us from nothing in particular. The two must remain inextricably linked.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of theological ground. We've gone from the cosmic grammar of creation to the specific traps of modern misinterpretation. But for the person listening to this deep dive right now, the ultimate question is, what is the bottom line?
How does this apply?
Yeah, how does this massive cosmic view of the law actually change the way someone wakes up and goes to work tomorrow? The text breaks down the practical implications into 4 specific areas of life.
The first area is the individual Christian life. A proper understanding of the law provides the framework for concrete repentance. It prevents spirituality from being vague.
Vague spirituality is everywhere right now.
It is, but the law exposes our hidden idols, our careless speech, our dishonest gain. It gives highly specific definitions of what better actually means. And crucially, because of the mediation of Christ, the mature believer can read these commands with reverence rather than panic. The mirror is no longer a threat. It is a tool for growth.
The second area the author touches on is discipleship. The text argues that true discipleship must include rigorous moral formation, drawing a sharp contrast with what Velazquez calls therapeutic inspiration.
This is a vital point for modern communities. The material argues that communities must actively teach people how to honor God's name, how to practice chastity, how to tell the truth, and how to resist greed.
Rather than just making them feel good.
Right. If the law is discarded, discipleship devolves into a mere support group aimed at making people feel comfortable with their flaws. The law provides actual tangible content to the word love. Love in the biblical framework is not just an emotion. It has a specific objective shape, and the law outlines the dimensions of that shape.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to point out the extreme tension here. We live in a culture entirely dominated by therapeutic healing.
Very much so.
The pervasive cultural message is, do whatever feels right for you, find your own truth, and remove any external judgment that makes you uncomfortable. Reintroducing this idea of objective, covenantal formation feels incredibly jarring. It almost feels offensive to modern sensibilities to suggest that there is an objective standard of love and holiness, and that human feelings are required to conform to it rather than the other way around.
It is a direct challenge to the modern idol of absolute autonomy. But the text insists that this objective standard is exactly what true ministry and leadership require, which is the third practical area.
Okay, so for leaders?
Leaders are instructed to use the law pastorally and diagnostically, not as a weapon for coercive control and not to crush vulnerable people, but to protect the community and guide redeemed people into actual flourishing.
And that standard extends into the fourth area, corporate worship and public life.
Yes, the author notes that worship must be shaped by divine revelation, not human preference. The community cannot simply build a golden calf because it is the kind of God they would prefer to interact with. They must receive God's self-disclosure.
It's not a Build-A-Bear situation.
No, it's not. Furthermore, in the public square, the law affirms that moral order genuinely matters for society. The principles of justice, truth-telling, the sanctity of marriage, the protection of property, and the inherent dignity of human life, these are essential.
So they shouldn't just hide these beliefs.
No, the text encourages believers not to retreat from the public significance of these standards, but it reminds them that they bear witness to this righteousness. They do not violently coerce the world into following it.
So synthesizing all of this, where does that leave the modern reader?
Velazquez provides a beautiful synthesis at the conclusion of the text. He argues that the community today lives in the space between Sinai and Zion.
Between the mountain of the law and the mountain of the kingdom.
Exactly. They live between the historical giving of the command and the future, perfect fulfillment of the kingdom. Believers are taught to listen to the law now, not as the voice of a condemning judge preparing to strike them down, but as the voice of a holy Father who has already secured their redemption.
To wrap this all up, let's just briefly recap the sheer scale of the journey we've taken through this material. We started by examining the moral grammar of creation, the realities baked into the universe long before Mount Sinai. We looked at the critical sequence of the Exodus, proving that the rescue always precedes the rules. We saw the law function as a diagnostic MRI, perfectly exposing the fatal tumor of sin but possessing no power to perform the surgery. We watched the flawed builders reject the blueprint at the golden calf, and then we examined the master key Jesus, who fulfills the law, bears its curse, and supplies the Spirit so the law can finally be written on the human heart, transforming believers into native speakers of holiness.
It is a comprehensive framework. Yet if we look closely at the final infographic, there is one last stage in this grand narrative that points beyond our current reality, the stage of eternity, or the new creation.
And I want to leave you, for you listening, with a final provocative thought based on that ultimate stage. According to the source material, in eternity, the law is not abolished or thrown away. It is perfectly fulfilled in unbroken communion with the divine. So consider the implications of this.
This is the big question.
If the ultimate goal of human existence, the highest possible state of eternity, is a reality where this moral law is so deeply, intrinsically fused with our own desires that we never even have to consciously think about obeying it anymore, because doing the right, holy thing has become as natural and effortless as breathing. What does that tell you about the truest definition of human freedom?
It forces a complete reevaluation of what freedom actually is.
We started this deep dive talking about traffic tickets, terms of service, and the heavy burden of the fine print. We assume rules are the enemy of liberty, but maybe true freedom isn't the total absence of rules. Maybe true freedom is finally becoming the kind of person who naturally, effortlessly loves the very things that keep us alive. The law isn't the restrictive fence anymore. When fully internalized, it is the ultimate, endless, open road.
That's a beautiful way to end it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring these sources, keep examining the foundations of the grand narrative, and keep asking the big questions. We will catch you next time.